A CEO suspected the quiet night janitor of stealing company secrets and spying on her business. She followed him after work, ready to expose him. But what she discovered inside a broken-down community center that night didn't just change her opinion of him. It changed her entire life and the future of her company, forever. Who was David Mensa really? A criminal or the forgotten genius who built it all? Strange rumors began drifting through the company like cold air slipping under a closed door. Files had been accessed without permission. Systems logged activity long after employees had gone home. Doors to restricted areas opened at impossible hours. When Amina Okoro, the newly appointed CEO, requested the security footage, she expected to see hackers, criminals, traitors. Instead, the screen revealed something far more unsettling that IT was the janitor, David Carter, the single dad. Quiet, invisible. The man no one looked at twice. Again and again, the cameras caught the same image. David slipping into restricted hallways, his key card hovering over doors he wasn't meant to touch, his reflection flickering across server room glass, a small flash drive glinting between his fingers in the dim light. Nights, weekends, holidays, every sign screamed corporate espionage. Yet something didn't sit right with Amina. Criminals are careless. David wasn't. He moved with respect, not fear. With intent, not greed. If every step had meaning beyond the cameras watching him, he never rushed. Never panicked. He cleaned every surface he touched. He straightened tilted chairs. He even whispered soft apologies to sleeping computers as he worked. Who breaks the law and still protects the place they're stealing from? From her office window high above the city, Amina watched him that evening as he walked across the empty lobby. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. His hands were cracked from chemicals. But tucked carefully inside his worn jacket was a tiny pink hair. Amina's eyes narrowed. That wasn't stolen data. That was a sign of a child waiting at home. Instead of calling security, instead of ending his job in an instant, Amina made a different choice. The next night, as the building lights dimmed and shadow filled the corridors, she pulled on a plain coat, lowered her hood, and followed the janitor into the dark. Unseen, uncertain, unprepared for the truth waiting on the other side. Amina kept her distance as David's old car rattled onto the highway. IT was nothing like the sleek vehicles that filled her company's underground garage. Its paint had faded under years of sun, the bumper held together by stubborn hope and a strip of duct tape. Each time he changed lanes, the engine gave a tired cough, as if reminding the world it had long ago stopped trying to impress anyone. But he drove with care. As the city lights thinned into broken street lamps and cracked sidewalks, Amina felt a tightness form in her chest. This was where the maps of power and success ended, where glass towers disappeared, replaced by rust and concrete, and stories nobody bothered to hear. David turned into a neighborhood most people only saw on the evening news. Overgrown yards, boarded windows, graffiti layered on top of old graffiti, kids playing basketball with a crooked hoop nailed to a decaying pole. And in the middle of it all, a building that had seen better decades than a worn-down community center. Its sign hung by one chain, creaking in the breeze. One window was cracked. Another had been patched with cardboard. Yet the front doors glowed with warm, yellow light, spilling onto the street like an invitation. David parked, stepped out, and suddenly, the man Amina knew as a silent janitor disappeared. "Mr. D," a voice shouted as the doors burst open. Then another and another. Children rushed toward him. Not attackers, not witnesses to a crime, but students greeting the arrival of their favorite teacher. They wrapped their arms around his waist and his legs. He laughed in surprise, steadying himself as backpacks bounced and sneakers scraped across the pavement. "You all going to break your teacher before class even starts?" he teased. Their faces glowed with joy. Amina froze in her car. This wasn't fear. This wasn't desperation. This was love. He walked inside. And though every instinct told her to remain hidden, something stronger, curiosity, guilt, hope, pulled her after him. Amina stepped silently through the side door and into a different world. The inside of the building looked tired, but someone had tried their best to make it beautiful. Hand-drawn posters filled the walls. Dream big, coders change the world, you matter. An old whiteboard stood at the front of the main room. Folding chairs filled with children of every age faced a long table covered in mismatched laptops, tangled chargers, wires, and circuit boards that had been fixed and refixed again. And there stood David, N-O-M-O-P, N-O bucket, N-O uniform. Just a marker in his hand and a quiet strength in his voice. "All right, listen up, engineers," he said, writing lines of code across the board. "Today we're building something that people in tall buildings with fancy titles don't want you to understand." A few kids giggled. Others leaned in, serious and focused. "Systems," he continued. "Not computer systems. Life systems. When the world crashes, you don't shut down. You debug. You find a problem. You fix it." He handed out refurbished laptops, different brands, different sizes, all cleaned and carefully labeled with the children's names that Amina's breath caught in her throat. She recognized some of them. They belonged to her company. Old inventory, tossed aside, written off as outdated and useless. David had rescued them from the trash. One small girl raised her hand. "Mr. D, what if I break it?" He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Then we'll fix it together." That's how learning works. Nothing is broken forever. A boy on the other side of the room beamed when his program finally ran. David walked behind him and rested a hand on his shoulder. "I knew you could do it, Marcus. You see how powerful you are." Another child, shy and silent in the back corner, hesitated to touch her keyboard at all. David noticed instantly. "Come here, Lila," he said softly, pulling up another chair. "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to try. I'll do it with you." He never raised his voice, never rushed them, that he called each one by name, remembered their stories, their fears, their dreams. He spoke to them not as kids from a poor neighborhood, but as artists, builders, innovators, leaders that Amina's heart ached. This was the man her company called the Janitor. This was the thief she had followed. And then she noticed something on the far wall, that a large, faded photo taped just above the teacher's desk. It showed a younger David in a graduation cap, his arm wrapped around a woman whose smile filled the entire frame. Below it, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "For Sophia. Everything I do is for you." Amina remembered the bow she had seen tucked in his jacket, the tiny pink one that suddenly, reality slammed in her. David wasn't sneaking into restricted areas to steal, he was downloading educational programs, accessing abandoned databases, recovering forgotten code libraries, pulling learning tools out of a system that never meant to serve children like these, that he wasn't committing espionage. He was building futures, and all of it for one little girl waiting at home. For a daughter he refused to let the world forget. Amina stepped back into the shadows, not as a CEO watching a suspect, but as a woman watching the kind of man the world had failed to reward. And as the children laughed around him and computers glowed like tiny suns in the dim room, she realized something that shook her to the core. The real criminal was the system she herself ran. Sleep would not come to Amina that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same images again and again. David kneeling beside a child, his hands guiding small fingers across a keyboard. The way he spoke to them with patience and belief. The way they clung to his every word like it was oxygen. This wasn't the behavior of a criminal. This was the heart of a teacher, a guardian, that a man who had chosen giving over getting. By morning, her decision was made. If David Carter had a secret life, she was going to uncover every corner of it. Not as a CEO looking to punish, but as a human being searching for the truth. She arrived at her office before sunrise and locked the door behind her. No assistants, no board members, no lawyers. Just her, the company's internal database, and a name that had suddenly come to mean more to her than any contract or chart. David Carter. The system paused for a moment, as if it, too, hesitated to reveal what had long been buried. Then the screen filled with files. Resumes, patents, security reports, legal records locked under executive clearance. Her heart started racing. The first document left her frozen. Lead Systems Architect, Project Genesis David Carter. Year, 2012. Amina stared at the screen in disbelief. Project Genesis was the backbone of her entire corporation. the technology that had launched the company into global dominance. The framework that powered everything from government systems to financial networks to digital security infrastructures. That system had made men billionaires at IT, had made her CEO, and the name at the top of the project was a janitor pushing a mop down her hallways. She opened file after file. David's code was everywhere. In the earliest security layers, in the architecture of their private networks, in the adaptive AI models the company now took credit for. He hadn't just worked for the company, he had built it. And then she saw the next folder, marked in red, termination, blacklisted. Internal her hands trembled as she clicked it open. Meeting transcripts lined the document. Private board discussions, hidden financial logs, contracts with defense corporations and surveillance agencies. Deals that desperate communities would have called illegal, inhuman, criminal. That David's voice echoed through the typed conversation. You can't use this technology to track civilians without consent. This system is meant to protect people, not cage them. You're planning to sell privacy like it's a product. Then a response from a senior executive. You are an employee, not the moral compass of the world. David refused to sign the final approval. That he refused to install the invasive backdoor that would allow the company to silently monitor millions. That he refused to trade human dignity for profit. In that moment, he became a problem. The documents continued, each one darker than the last. His access revoked, his credentials erased, his reputation quietly destroyed. False reports planted in his file. Unstable, difficult, disloyal, potential threat, and the final line, reassigned to below visibility position. Keep him where he can be monitored. Below visibility. A pretty corporate phrase for a brutal reality. They broke him, then hid him in plain sight. Amina leaned back in her chair, breath stolen from her lungs, while men she sat beside in boardrooms praised profit margins, while magazines praised her as a symbol of power, while the world admired the empire's rise. The true architect of it all was emptying trash cans, scrubbing toilets, sweeping floors that never noticed his name. She scrolled deeper. Hospital records. A car accident. A funeral. Notice, Sophia Carter, deceased. 2016. Amina felt something in her chest break. The woman in the photo. The smile, taped to the wall of the community center. David's wife, gone. Taken while he was fighting corporate greed in silent hallways and closed-door meetings. And tucked beneath the funeral notice was a single line that shattered her completely. Survived by daughter, Amara Carter, age 4. The tiny pink bow suddenly made perfect sense. David wasn't just a widower, he was a single father standing in the wreckage of his entire life, the man who had lost love, lost purpose, lost credit for his own brilliance, and still found the strength to lift others. Instead of leaving the company and drowning in bitterness, he had done something she could barely fathom. That he stayed. Not for revenge, but for the discarded, the broken equipment, the forgotten children who reminded him of the little girl. Waiting at home. He used access they thought meant nothing to create something that meant everything. He cleaned during the day, so he could teach the future at night. Amina closed her laptop slowly as tears welled in her eyes. Every day she had walked past him, never knowing the legend moving silently beside her, never knowing she was standing in the shadow of the very man who had made her possible. The janitor she ignored was the genius they all betrayed. And for the first time in her career, Amina Okoro felt something heavier than responsibility. She felt shame, not for what she had done, but for what she had allowed. She stood and walked to the mirror by her office window. A powerful woman in a tailored suit stared back. But behind that reflection, she saw something else now. A system built on stolen brilliance. A throne built on a broken man's silence. Then, just above the city, far away, in a worn-down community center, she imagined David still there, bent over a laptop beside a child, telling them that nothing is ever broken beyond repair. Amina wiped her tears. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then it's time the world learned the truth about you, David Carter. And in that moment, a decision was born. Not as a CEO, but as a woman who finally understood that the real power of a leader is knowing when to step aside and let the forgotten genius rise again. It was supposed to be the greatest moment in the company's history, that a global launch, that a new system that would connect governments, hospitals, banks, and schools into a single seamless network. News outlets had already reserved their headlines. Investors were flying in from across the world. The board was calling it the future of civilization, and Amina Okoro stood at the center of it all. Cameras capturing every movement, flashing lights bouncing off polished floors. A carefully rehearsed speech sitting on a teleprompter in front of her. Behind the glass walls of the executive floor, engineers huddled around glowing screens, their faces tight with strained excitement. Everything had been tested, retested, simulated 1,000 times, perfect, untouchable, unbreakable, until it wasn't. That it happened without warning. Point one moment, the system flowed like a living heartbeat. The next, every screen went black, then red. Lines of code began violently cascading downward. Error messages multiplied like wildfire. Alarms rang out for the first time in the building's history. Server 1 is down. We've lost the backups. Firewalls are collapsing. I'm locked out. What is happening? Panic erupted across every floor. More terrifying than the noise, though, was what appeared on the massive screen in the center of the command room. Point one words blinked again and again. System failure. Totaling Mina's stomach dropped. This wasn't a simple crash. This was an extinction-level collapse. If this system failed globally, power grids would freeze. Medical records would vanish. Banking systems would lock. Airports would shut down. Emergency services would go blind. Millions of lives could be affected. Her company wouldn't just fall, the IT would be blamed for bringing the world to its knees. Can we reverse it? She demanded. Her head engineer's voice trembled. It's too intertwined, too complex. Whoever designed this layer buried it too deeply. Amina swallowed. Whoever designed this layer, she already knew the answer. Eyes across the room quietly turned toward the windows that overlooked the hallway outside, toward the man pushing a cleaning cart, toward the ghost of their genius, toward David, the janitor who had once been their architect. Amina didn't hesitate. She walked past the paralyzed engineers, past the shocked board members, past the gathering reporters and security, and straight into the hallway. David. He looked up from his cart, startled by her sudden presence among the chaos. What's wrong, Ms. Okoro? He asked, his voice steady despite the sirens wailing in the distance. Everything, she said simply, and only you know how to fix it. A silence fell between them. Years of erasure, betrayal, ignored brilliance, hidden pain, all resting in that one moment. They don't deserve your help, he said quietly. I know, she replied, but the people who will suffer do. That was all he needed to hear. David nodded once and stepped back into the world that had once rejected him. Inside the command center, disbelief washed over every face as the janitor walked in among them, removing his gloves, loosening his worn jacket, pulling a chair to the center console as if he had never left that seat. He touched the keyboard, and something ancient, powerful, and alive seemed to awaken in him. The lines of code did not frighten him. They recognized him. I wrote the base. Architecture 12 years ago, he said, typing rapidly. But someone's added a recursive layer on top of it, a predatory loop that feeds on itself. How do we stop it? An engineer asked in awe. You don't stop it, he answered calmly. You outsmart it. His fingers moved like music across the keys that he rewrote live code with surgical precision, bypassed barriers thought to be unbreakable, accessed hidden channels no one remembered creating. The same men who once erased his name now watched with silent respect as he performed miracles they never could. Hours passed, then more hours. He didn't eat, didn't rest, didn't blink. He just worked, like a father fixing a broken toy for a crying child. Only this time, the crying child was the world. Day turned to night. Night turned to dawn. Dawn turned to another night. 48 hours after the collapse, David finally leaned back. His hands hovered above the keyboard for one last breath. Then he pressed a single key. The screens flickered. Green bars rose. Systems pulsed back to life one by one like a heart restarting. Power grids reconnected. Hospitals regained access. Flights resumed. The world exhaled, system stable, upgraded, The room erupted. Applause. Tears. Shouts. Uncontrolled relief. Amina stood frozen as she watched the impossible happen. Not just a recovery, but a rebirth that he hadn't simply saved the company. He had made it untouchable, stronger, cleaner, safer, ethical. David looked around at the stunned faces, and for a moment, the past and present collided in silence. Then Amina stepped forward, in front of her staff, in front of the board, in front of the cameras streaming live around the world. She spoke into the microphone, her voice steady, emotional, true. The man who saved this company is not a consultant, not a contractor, not a miracle worker we called in at the last minute. She turned toward him. Is the man this company betrayed, she continued. The mind this company erased. The architect this company tried to bury. Gasps filled the air. She placed a hand over her heart. Today, the world will finally know his name. She faced the cameras. Meet the true creator of Project Genesis, the original systems architect of this corporation. Her voice cracked. David Carter. A flash of blinding light from the cameras filled the room. Reporters scrambled. Is it true he was a janitor? How could the company hide this? Why was he blacklisted? But David didn't answer any of them at first. He simply looked at Amina. Why now? He asked softly. Because the world needs to see more than power, she replied. It needs to see truth and redemption in you. He looked down at his worn hands, hands that had built empires and then cleaned floors. When you erase a man long enough, he said quietly, even he forgets who he is. Amina shook her head. Not today. Not ever again. She handed him something that made the entire room go silent once more, the new identification badge. Not labeled janitor. Not labeled staff. Printed in bold. Chief Systems Architect David stared at it. Disbelief and brokenness and hope all fighting inside his chest at once. For your daughter, Amina whispered. So she grows up knowing who her father truly is. Tears finally fell. From the genius who was told to disappear, from the CEO who chose to bring him back, and from every person who suddenly understood that greatness doesn't always wear a title. Sometimes it pushes them up. The applause lasted for days. Interviews, headlines, panels, offers, tech giants called. Universities sent letters. Venture capitalists promised numbers so high they barely felt real. They all wanted the same thing, David Carter, on their stage, in their building, under their name. Amina placed a contract in front of him that could change his life forever. Chief Systems Architect, executive benefits, private office on the top floor at a salary large enough to erase a lifetime of struggle in a single pen stroke. That he studied the paper quietly. Then he slid it back. I already have a job, he said softly. Amina looked up in confusion. David, this is the job. He smiled, not bitter, not proud. Just peaceful. No, my real job is across town, in a building that doesn't even have proper windows. Her heart tightened. The children, she whispered. They're the reason I kept going, he replied. When the world took everything from me, they gave me purpose again. I won't trade that for a title. It was the moment Amina finally understood. Leadership didn't always sit in boardrooms. Sometimes it sat on a broken chair beside a cracked table, teaching a child to believe in themselves. Instead of trying to change David, she chose to change the system. Within a week, her company announced a new global initiative, Project Second Light, a partnership between one of the most powerful tech corporations in the world and one forgotten, worn-down community center. Funding poured in where there had once been dust and silence. The building was rebuilt, not into something cold and corporate, but into something warm and welcoming. New windows, bright colors, classrooms filled with light, a computer for every child, a library, a robotics lab, a creative studio, and above the entrance, carved into the stone, were the words, "The Carter Innovation Center." David stood beneath the sign in disbelief. "This isn't for me," he said. "It's because of you," Amina replied. Children who once had no direction now had possibility. Broken homes raised future engineers. Shy students found voices. Troubled teens found purpose. And the employees of the very company that once erased him now volunteered as mentors under his guidance. executives, programmers, designers, analysts. They sat in folding chairs listening to a man who once washed their floor. The corporation didn't just grow in profit, IT grew a heart. And somewhere along the way, something else unexpected began to heal. 2.2 people who had spent their lives hiding behind walls slowly began to let those walls fall. A guarded CEO, afraid to show weakness, a forgotten genius, afraid to trust again. They shared stories on quiet evenings beneath the center's flickering lights, stories of loss, of survival, of dreams buried and found again. That IT wasn't loud, that IT wasn't rushed, IT wasn't perfect, but it was real. Point one afternoon, as laughter echoed from inside the classrooms, David watched the children through the glass windows. They're going to change the world one day, he said. Amina smiled. No, you already have. He looked at her thoughtfully, and you gave them the space to do it. In that moment, surrounded by voices that once felt impossible, by futures that once felt unreachable, they both realized the same truth. Second chances were not born from power. They were born from courage, from honesty, from kindness, from choosing people over profit. And in the quiet of a small, shining community center, 2 broken lives and hundreds of once forgotten children found their purpose again, together. 6 months ago, she followed a janitor, convinced he was a threat. Tonight, she stands inside a glowing center built on second chances. Children type dreams into glowing screens. Laughter replaces fear. Hope replaces silence. David never asked for fame, that he only asked for a chance to serve. And Amina finally learned something no business school ever taught her. That true power is not in titles, it's in the lives you lift. Sometimes, the real heroes aren't found in boardrooms. They're found quietly cleaning the floors of broken dreams and turning them into futures. And the most beautiful code of all is written in the human heart.